You are a loser! You are a loser!
You smell like a loser. The words hit the air like a slap with no hand behind it. Calvin Cho did not shout them. He did not need to. He said them the way a man says something he has been holding for a long time and finally found an audience worthy of the performance. Casual, smiling, leaning back in his chair like a king who had just made a joke at the court's expense and was waiting for the applause. The applause came. 6 men around that dinner table erupted in laughter. Deep, careless, expensive laughter that bounced off the walls of the private dining room and settled like smoke over everything. Glasses clinked. Someone slapped the table. Someone else repeated the words between gasps, savoring them, rolling them around like fine wine. Jasmine did not move. She sat at the far end of that table in a dress the color of midnight, her hands folded in her lap, her face arranged into something so still it could have been carved from stone. She had heard the words clearly. Every syllable. She had felt the room shift the moment Calvin said them, felt the air change texture, felt 6 pairs of eyes swing toward her like spotlights finding the wrong person on a stage. She did not flinch. She had learned a long time ago that flinching was an invitation, that tears in a room full of the wrong people was just more entertainment. So she sat with her back straight and her jaw soft, and she let the laughter wash over her like water over rock. And she felt something inside her chest go very, very quiet. Not broken. Not humiliated. Done. It was the kind of done that does not announce itself. The kind that arrives without drama, without a speech, without a single raised voice. The kind that had been building for months, layered beneath every unanswered question, every dismissed concern, every moment Calvin had looked through her instead of at her. The kind of done that only needed one final thing to make it permanent. He had just given her that thing. At the other end of the table, slightly removed from the group as though he had never quite belonged to it, a man named Delbert sat with his glass untouched and his eyes fixed on Karen's face. He had not laughed. He had not even smiled. He had watched the whole thing the way a person watches something unfold that they know they will not be able to forget. His expression unreadable, his jaw tight. He saw what nobody else at that table bothered to look for. He saw the exact moment she decided. Karen reached for her clutch slowly, without urgency, without performance. She pushed her chair back with the quiet precision of a woman who had already left long before she stood up. She did not look at Calvin. She did not look at anyone. Except once, for just one brief, unplanned second. Her eyes met Delbert's across that long table, and something passed between them that neither of them had words for yet. Then she walked out, and the laughter continued behind her, loud and oblivious, and already meaningless. If you are new here, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss a single chapter. This story is just getting started, and you do not want to walk in late. The Seoul night was cold and indifferent, and exactly what she needed. Jasmine got into the back seat of the waiting car, pulled the door shut behind her, and said nothing to the driver. He already knew where to go. He had been driving her for 8 months and had learned early that she was not a woman who needed conversation to fill silence. He pulled into traffic without a word, and she was grateful for that. She sat with her clutch in her lap and her back straight out of habit, and watched the city move past the windows in streaks of light she was not really seeing. Her mind was very quiet, quieter than it had been in months. That was the strange part. She had just walked out of the most humiliating evening of her adult life, and her mind was the calmest it had been since she landed in Seoul a year ago, and decided this city, this man, this life, could be something worth staying for. She had been wrong about the man. She had not been wrong about herself. That distinction mattered more than she had words for right now. Her phone screen lit up twice in her bag. She did not reach for it. She already knew it was not Calvin calling. Calvin would not call. Calvin would finish his meal, order another round for the table, and tell whatever story came next with the same energy he had used to humiliate her. Because to him the evening was still going well. She was not a loss he would feel tonight. She was barely a footnote. That used to hurt more than it did right now. Right now it just confirmed everything. She had promised herself she would not cry over Calvin Cho. She had made that promise 3 weeks ago, standing in his bathroom, with the tap running loud enough to cover any sound she might make. She had kept it every morning since then, through breakfasts eaten in silence, and evenings where she sat across from him and watched him look through her like she was furniture he had stopped noticing. She had kept that promise through things far worse than tonight. She kept it now for exactly 4 more minutes. Then one tear fell. Just one. It came from her left eye and moved slowly down her cheek, and she did not stop it. She let it finish. She watched the city lights blur, and she let that single tear be the very last thing Calvin Cho would ever pull from her body without her permission. Then she straightened up. She reached into her bag and found her phone. 2 missed messages, both from Rena. She opened the thread and typed 3 words. "I am done." Rena's reply came in 11 seconds flat. "I know. Come home." Karen locked her screen and let her head fall back against the headrest. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, and let her mind go to the one place it kept returning to, without her instruction. The man who had not laughed. She did not know his name. She had been introduced to everyone at that table when she arrived, but names had stopped registering for her at some point during the evening, when the conversation grew loud and exclusive, and she had quietly understood she was not really part of it. She remembered his face, though, the way he sat slightly apart from the group, as though he had shown up for a different reason than the rest of them. The way his glass stayed full the entire night. The way he had not smiled even once when the others found their rhythm of easy cruelty. And the way he had looked at her, not with pity. She would have felt pity immediately and recoiled from it. It was something else, something that did not have a comfortable name. Like he was watching something unfold that bothered him deeply, and he was making a decision about what to do with that feeling. She did not know what he had decided. She did not know why she was thinking about a stranger on a night that belonged entirely to her own survival. She opened her eyes and sat up and put the thought away deliberately, like folding something and placing it in a drawer. She had a flight to book. She had a life waiting in Dallas that she had put on hold for a man who had just proven, finally and completely, that he had never deserved the pause. She pulled up her travel app and started looking at flights back to Texas. Behind her, the lights of Seoul grew smaller. She did not look back. 3 weeks earlier, the apartment was quiet in the way that expensive places are quiet. Not peaceful, just insulated. 40 floors above Seoul, behind floor-to-ceiling glass and climate-controlled air, the noise of the city below was something that happened to other people. Karen had found that kind of quiet impressive when she first moved in. Now it just felt like a lid pressed down over everything. She was in the kitchen when Calvin came home. She heard his keys before she heard him. Then his footsteps across the marble floor, unhurried. The walk of a man who owned everything he stepped on. She did not turn around immediately. She finished pouring the water she had been pouring and set the glass down, and then she turned. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for weeks, like he was doing a calculation she was not supposed to see, like she was a number that was no longer adding up the way he needed it to. "You cooked," he said. Not a question, not gratitude, just an observation he made the way you note traffic or weather. Something present that required no particular response. "I did," Karen said. He loosened his tie and sat at the kitchen island and looked at his phone while she plated the food. She set his plate in front of him and took her own to the other side of the island, and they ate the way they had been eating for the past month. Together, but separately. Close, but unreachable. She had been trying to find the words for 3 weeks. The right entry point into a conversation she knew would not go cleanly. She had rehearsed it in the shower and on her walks and in the spaces between sleeping and waking when the mind is honest, before it has time to be careful. She had tried 17 different openings and discarded all of them. Tonight she decided to stop rehearsing. "Calvin, I need to talk to you about something." He did not look up from his phone immediately. He finished reading whatever he was reading, set the phone face down, and looked at her with the particular patience of a man who has decided in advance that what he is about to hear will not be important. "Go ahead," he said. She told him. Not everything, but enough. She told him what she had been feeling, how the distance had grown into something she could no longer pretend was temporary, how she needed to understand where they were going, because she had put real things on hold to be in Seoul with him, and she deserved to know if that meant anything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his fork and went back to his food. "You are being dramatic," he said. Something shifted in the room. Karen felt it physically. a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked at him eating and breathing and existing with complete ease, and she understood in that moment that nothing she had just said had landed anywhere inside him. She pushed her plate aside and stood up. That was when it happened. She would not describe it later because she would not speak of it at all. Not to Rena, not to anyone. She would carry it the way women carry things that the world will not hold carefully enough, pressed down and locked and stored somewhere behind the part of her that still had to function and make decisions and book flights and move forward. What she would allow herself to remember was this: the tap running in the bathroom afterward, the cold water on her wrists, the way she looked at her own face in the mirror for a long time without seeing it. The decision she made in that bathroom that was not really a decision because it had already been made for her by what just happened. The next morning she woke before him. She moved through the apartment silently, selecting only what was entirely hers. One carry-on bag. 14 months of her life reduced to what she could lift with one hand. She wrote nothing. She left nothing. She simply picked up her bag and her passport and her keys and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. She did not look back at the bedroom where he was still sleeping. She opened the door and walked out and pulled it shut behind her with the softest possible click, like she was trying not to wake something she no longer wanted any part of. The elevator arrived immediately. She got in, pressed the lobby button, and watched the floors count down. By the time she hit the ground floor, she had already opened her travel app. She just had not known yet that she would stay 3 more weeks. That something would keep her feet in Seoul a little longer than her heart wanted to be there. That she would sit across from Calvin Cho at one more dinner, and wear one more dress, and survive one more room full of laughter, before she finally, completely, and permanently left. But the decision had already been made in that bathroom. Everything after it was just the ending catching up. Now you know what happened behind that closed door 3 weeks before the dinner. Now you understand why she sat at that table the way she did. Why she did not argue. Why she did not fight back. She had already left. She was just waiting for her body to catch up with what her mind had decided in that bathroom. But here is what you do not know yet. Calvin is not the only one who cannot sleep tonight. Somewhere in Seoul, a man named Delbert is sitting in his hotel room staring at the ceiling, thinking about a woman he does not even know the name of, and he is about to do something about that. If you are new to this channel, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Every scener drops here first, and you do not want to be the last one to know what happens next. Dallas received her the way it always did. Not with fanfare. Not with the kind of welcome that requires an audience. Just with heat and wide roads and a sky so big it made everything underneath it feel both small and possible at the same time. Karen pressed her face briefly against the window of the cab from the airport and felt something in her shoulders drop that she had not realized she had been holding up for 14 months. She was home. Not the home she had grown up in. Not the home she had imagined building with someone else. Just hers. Entirely and completely and without negotiation. Hers. The property sat at the end of a quiet road in a part of Dallas that did not announce itself. No gates with initials pressed into iron. No landscaping that performed for passing cars. Just a long driveway, old trees on both sides, and a house at the end of it that most people who knew Karen would never have connected to her name. That was intentional. Everything about the way she lived in Dallas was intentional. Rena was sitting on the front steps when the cab pulled up. She stood when she saw Karen get out. She did not rush forward. She did not make a sound. She just stood there and waited while Karen paid the driver and lifted her single bag from the back seat and walked up the path toward her. When Karen reached the steps, Rena looked at her face for a long moment and then pulled her in without a word. They stood like that for longer than either of them would have admitted to anyone else. Then Karen stepped back, picked up her bag, and went inside. "You want tea or something stronger?" Rena said from behind her. "Tea," Karen said, "and then I want to sleep for approximately 3 days. You can have 2. I have things I need to tell you after that." Karen almost smiled. Almost. She moved through the house slowly, touching things without thinking about it. The edge of the kitchen counter, the back of her favorite chair, the row of books on the shelf in the hallway that she had been meaning to reorganize for 2 years. Small, ordinary things that had been waiting patiently for her to come back to them and were making no comment about how long it had taken. She dropped her bag in the bedroom and stood at the window, looking out at the back garden. The light was doing something particular with the trees. Late afternoon gold cutting through the leaves. and laying itself across the grass in long shapes. She had missed this light. Seoul had its own beauty, but it had never felt like it belonged to her. This light did. Her phone had been quiet since she landed. Calvin had called once while she was in the air, which she discovered when she turned her phone back on at baggage claim. She had looked at his name on the screen for 3 full seconds before she cleared the notification. Not blocked, not deleted, just cleared. She was not ready to make it permanent in the technical sense. The permanent had already happened somewhere else, in a way that no phone setting could improve upon or undo. Later that evening, she sat at her kitchen table with Rena across from her, and both hands wrapped around a mug, and she did not talk about Calvin. Rena did not ask about Calvin. They talked about everything else. A contract Karen needed to review. A property in Austin that her manager had flagged for her attention. A situation with one of her holdings that needed a decision by end of the week. This was the life Calvin Cho had never seen. Not because she had hidden it maliciously, but because she had learned early that money shown too soon became the only thing people looked at afterward. She had wanted to be seen first, really seen. The woman before the portfolio, the person before the property. She had wanted someone to choose her when she looked like she had nothing, because those were the only choices she had ever been able to trust. Calvin had failed that without even knowing the test existed. She reviewed the Austin property file after Rena left, made 2 calls, sent 3 emails. By 9 in the evening, she had handled more real business than she had been able to focus on in the last 2 months in Seoul combined. She closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her house and breathed. Calvin called again at 9:43. She watched his name light up the screen on the table beside her. She watched it until it stopped. Then she turned the phone face down and finished her tea. Outside, the Dallas sky had gone full dark and enormous, the way it does in Texas, like it is reminding you of something important about scale and patience and the particular freedom of taking up exactly as much space as you actually need. Karen Jasmine took up her space. For the first time in 14 months, she did it without apology. She is home. She is breathing. She is already back to the business of being exactly who she is, without shrinking for anyone. Calvin's calls are going unanswered, and Karen Jasmine is finally sleeping through the night again. But on the other side of the world, a man named Delbert cannot say the same thing. He is back in his own life, moving through his days, closing deals and taking meetings and doing everything right. Except he cannot stop thinking about a woman who walked out of a room without looking back, and he just made one phone call that told him everything he needed to know about the man she left behind. Delbert was not a man who lost sleep over things he could not control. He had built that discipline the hard way, through years of making decisions in rooms where hesitation was expensive and doubt was something you processed alone and after hours. He had learned to compartmentalize with the clean efficiency of someone who understood that carrying unnecessary weight slowed everything down. He slept well. He ate well. He moved through his days with the particular steadiness of a man who knew exactly who he was and had stopped apologizing for the size of it. That was before the dinner in Seoul. It had been 11 days since he flew back to Houston, and he had thought about her every single one of them. Not obsessively. Not in the way that disrupts a man's functioning. Just consistently. The way a song you did not choose gets into the back of your mind and plays quietly underneath everything else you are doing. Present without permission. Impossible to locate and switch off. He had tried to be reasonable about it. He told himself it was just the circumstance. That watching someone get humiliated in public and responding with dignity was the kind of thing that stayed with a person because it was simply rare. He told himself he felt compassion, not fascination. He told himself a lot of things over 11 days that he almost believed. Then, he picked up the phone and called Calvin. It was a Wednesday evening. He framed it as a follow-up on the business discussion they had started at the dinner, which was true enough to not feel dishonest. They spoke for 12 minutes about nothing that mattered. And then at the end, deliberately casual, the way you drop something into a conversation that you have been holding the entire time, Delbert said it. The woman at the dinner. The one who left early. Who was she? Calvin's response came without pause. Karen? Nobody. Just someone I was spending time with. You know how it is. Delbert said nothing for a moment. She leave on her own terms or yours, he said. Calvin laughed, the same laugh from the dinner table. Easy and careless and completely unbothered. Does it matter? There are 1,000 Karens, my friend. You move on. Delbert made a sound that Calvin apparently took for agreement because the conversation shifted immediately back to business. They wrapped up 2 minutes later and hung up. Delbert set his phone on his desk and sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of his Houston office for a long time. 1,000 Karens. He thought about the woman who had sat at the end of that table with her hands folded in her lap and her face arranged into something so composed it had taken his breath away a little. He thought about the way she had stood up, the way she had walked out, the way her eyes had found his for exactly 1 second before she disappeared through that door, not searching for him, just landing there the way a bird lands briefly on a branch before continuing wherever it was always going. He thought about Calvin's voice saying nobody, like it was simply a fact. Something settled in Delbert's chest that was not quite anger and not quite resolve, but lived somewhere between both of them. He opened his laptop and pulled up his calendar. He had a business summit in Atlanta in 3 weeks, a series of meetings in New York the week after, and a conference in Houston at the end of the month. Full, the way his life was always full. He stared at the calendar for a moment. Then he opened a separate tab and looked up a business summit he had received an invitation to 4 weeks ago and quietly set aside. A 3-day event in Dallas, the kind of gathering where serious people went to talk about serious money. He had been planning to send a representative. He read through the event details slowly. Dallas. He did not know why he was thinking about Dallas in connection with anything. He had no reason to believe she was in Dallas. He had no information about her at all beyond a first name that Calvin had offered like it meant nothing. He was a precise man who made decisions based on data and evidence and established fact, and he had none of those things. He registered for the Dallas summit anyway. He told himself it was a good business decision. The speakers were strong. The networking would be valuable. The timing worked with his schedule. If he moved 2 things, he moved the 2 things. He confirmed his registration and closed the laptop and went back to the proposal he had been reviewing before he called Calvin. He worked for another 2 hours with his full concentration and did not think about the summit again that evening. But he did not think about her either, which was the first time in 11 days that had happened. Progress, he told himself. He almost meant it. Karen had not planned to attend. The Dallas Business Summit was the kind of event she received invitations to regularly and declined with equal regularity. 3 days of panels and keynotes and networking receptions where people handed each other cards and talked about disruption and innovation and said very little of actual substance while working very hard to appear substantial. She had been to enough of them to know the pattern. She usually sent her operations director Simone in her place and reviewed her notes over coffee the following Monday. But Simone had called her Thursday morning with a scheduling conflict she could not reasonably argue with, and she had looked at her calendar and looked at the invitation and made a decision she would spend the next 72 hours trying to understand. She went herself. She dressed simply. Dark trousers, a structured cream blazer, minimal jewelry, nothing that performed. She arrived on the second day of the summit mid-morning, collected her badge at registration under the name of her primary holding company rather than her own, and moved into the main hall with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly how to be present without being visible. She was looking for no one. She was thinking about a panel on alternative investment structures that Simone had flagged in her notes as worth Karen's direct attention. She was thinking about the conversation she needed to have with her real estate attorney the following week. She was thinking about the drive home and whether she would stop for food or eat at the house. She was not thinking about Seoul. She was not thinking about dinner tables or private rooms or men who did not laugh when everyone else did. She collected a coffee from the station near the east entrance and turned toward the main hall and stopped. He was standing 20 feet away with his back partially toward her, talking to 2 men in dark suits, taller than she remembered. Or maybe she had not paid enough attention at the dinner to register his height properly. She had registered other things, the stillness of him, the untouched glass, the jaw that tightened when Calvin said what he said. She registered all of those things again now in approximately 3 seconds. He had not seen her yet. She had a clean window to turn and walk in the other direction and spend the rest of the summit on the opposite side of the building and leave at the end of the day having successfully avoided a situation that did not need to become one. She was aware of this window. She stood in it for a moment and considered it seriously. Then his head turned. He saw her the way you see something you were not looking for, but somehow expected. No double take, no visible surprise, Just a stillness that moved through him like a current being switched on, and then his eyes found hers across that crowded hall and stayed there. Neither of them moved. One of the men he was talking to said something that required his response, and he answered without looking away from Karen, which she suspected was not something he did accidentally. Then he said something brief to both men, excused himself, and walked toward her. She did not move toward him. She stood where she was with her coffee in her hand, and watched him close the distance between them, and told herself her heart rate was completely normal for a person standing in a warm, crowded room. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he was different from the man she had assembled from memory over the past weeks. More present, more specific. The kind of face that did not photograph well, because cameras could not capture what it did when it was simply looking at you without any agenda behind it. "I did not get your name at the dinner," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. No preamble, no performance. "Karen," she said. "Delbert." He extended his hand. She took it. The handshake lasted exactly as long as handshakes last, and then it was over, and they were just two people standing in a business summit in Dallas, holding coffee and looking at each other like they were trying to locate something they had misplaced a long time ago. "You left early that night," he said. "I did," she said. He nodded once, like that answer was complete and required nothing added to it, like he already understood everything about why and had no intention of making her explain. "Are you attending the investment panel?" he said. "I was planning to." "So was I." He gestured toward the hall. "Shall we?" It was not quite a question. Karen looked at him for one more second. Then she fell into step beside him, and they walked into the hall together and found seats, and the panel began, and neither of them said another word for 40 minutes. But the conversation that happened in the silence between them during those 40 minutes was longer and more honest than anything either of them had said out loud in years. After the panel ended, he turned to her and said simply, "Can I take you to dinner?" Karen looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at him. "Not tonight," she said. "But yes." She said yes. Not tonight, but yes. And Delbert heard everything in those two words that Karen did not say out loud. He heard the caution and the history and the weight of a woman who had been careless with her trust once and was not prepared to be careless again. He heard all of it, and he was not deterred by a single part of it. Jasmine drove home from that summit and sat in her car in her own driveway for 14 minutes. She was not thinking about Calvin Cho. He texted her 4 days after the summit. Not the next day. Not 2 days after. 4. She noticed the gap and understood it was deliberate, and appreciated the deliberateness more than she would have appreciated urgency. Urgency in her experience belonged to men who were afraid the window would close before they got what they wanted. 4 days said something different. 4 days said he was not afraid of the window. The text was simple. "There is a restaurant in Uptown I think you would appreciate. No pressure. Whenever works for you." She read it twice. Then she set her phone down and went back to the contract she had been reviewing, and finished the page she was on before she picked it up again and replied. "Thursday works," he responded in under a minute. "Thursday it is. I will send you the details." That was the entire exchange. No excessive back and forth. No over-explaining. Just two people making a simple plan with the clean efficiency of people who had enough going on in their lives to appreciate simplicity when they found it. She told Rena about it that evening. Rena sat across from her at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which was not her natural setting. And when Karen finished, Rena looked at her for a long moment and said, "Is this the man from the dinner?" "Yes," Karen said. Rena nodded slowly. "The one who did not laugh?" "Yes." Another long moment. Then Rena picked up her mug and said, "Okay," in the tone of someone who had 17 more things to say and was choosing to say only that one for now. Karen was grateful for the restraint. Thursday came with the particular unhurried quality that days have when you are trying not to think about them. The restaurant was exactly what he had promised. Quiet, without being precious. Good lighting. The kind of place where the tables were spaced far enough apart that you could have a real conversation without performing it for the people beside you. She arrived 2 minutes before the reservation, and he was already there, standing near the entrance, not on his phone. That detail registered. They were seated, and the evening began the way evenings begin, when neither person is entirely sure what the evening is. Careful at first, professionally pleasant. They talked about the summit, about a speaker whose presentation had been genuinely interesting. about the alternative investment landscape in a way that revealed without announcing that both of them knew exactly what they were talking about. Somewhere between the first course and the second, the careful quality dissolved without either of them doing anything specific to dissolve it. He asked about Dallas, how long she had been based there, what she liked about it. Not as small talk, but as genuine curiosity, the kind that listens to the answer instead of waiting for its turn to speak. She found herself talking about the city in a way she had not talked about it to anyone in a long time. The light in the evenings, the particular quality of space that Texas had, the way the house at the end of her road felt like the first place she had chosen entirely for herself. He listened to all of it. "You seem very settled in yourself," he said at one point. She looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation," he said. "But yes." She almost smiled. "Most people find it off-putting. Most people are uncomfortable around women who do not need managing," he said simply, and went back to his food like he had said nothing remarkable at all. Karen picked up her glass and looked at it for a moment. She had not laughed genuinely in months. Not the social kind, the kind you produce for rooms and occasions, the real kind that arrives before you can decide whether to let it. It happened twice that evening. The first time surprised her. The second time, she stopped being surprised and just let it happen, and noticed afterward that her chest felt lighter than it had in a very long time. They stayed 4 hours. Neither of them acknowledged the length of it. The conversation simply kept finding the next place it wanted to go, and they followed it there without making a decision about whether to do so. By the time they walked out into the Dallas night, the city had gone quiet around them in the way it does late on a Thursday when the week is almost done. He walked her to her car. At the driver's door, she turned and looked at him, and he looked back at her with the same unhurried steadiness he seemed to carry everywhere, and she thought about saying something that she did not say. "Thank you for dinner," she said instead. "Thank you for Thursday," he said. She got in. He stepped back. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove the 20 minutes home, and pulled into her driveway and turned the engine off and sat in the dark of her own car. 12 minutes. She sat there for 12 full minutes before she went inside. She did not call Rena. She did not text anyone. She just went inside and made herself a cup of tea she did not drink, and stood at her kitchen window looking out at the dark garden and tried to locate the feeling sitting in her chest and give it a name. She could not find one that fit without frightening her. She went to bed without trying further. 4 hours. She stayed 4 hours and laughed twice, and drove home and sat in her car for 12 minutes in the dark. Karen Jasmine has not sat in a parking lot over a man since she was 23 years old. But here is what you do not know yet. Delbert drove home that same night and did something he has not done in a very long time. And whatever it was, is going to tell you everything about who he actually is, underneath the steadiness, and the suits, and the unhurried voice. She canceled on a Sunday, not a plan they had made formally, just something that had been forming naturally in the space between their last conversation and the present, the kind of next time that does not need to be scheduled, because both people already know it is coming. He had texted her Saturday evening, something simple about an exhibit opening downtown he thought she might find interesting. She had read it before bed and fallen asleep, thinking about how to respond. She woke up Sunday morning and felt the fear. Not about him specifically. That was what made it complicated. He had done nothing to produce the feeling sitting in her chest when she opened her eyes that morning. Nothing pushy. Nothing careless. Nothing that gave her a single concrete reason to protect herself from him. He had been exactly what he appeared to be across every interaction they had shared, and that was precisely the problem. She did not know what to do with a man she had no reason to be afraid of. Every wall she had ever built had been built in response to something. A lie she caught. A coldness she felt arriving before it was announced. A moment like the one in Calvin's kitchen where something shifted in the room and she understood she had been reading the situation wrong. She had learned to build early and build high and trust the instinct that told her when to start laying the first brick. But there was no brick here. There was no instinct firing. There was only a man who showed up on time and listened when she spoke and made her laugh twice in 4 hours and walked her to her car and said thank you for Thursday, like the evening had been a gift he received rather than one he gave. And that terrified her more than anything she knew how to name. She picked up her phone and typed, "I don't think I can do this." She stared at it for a long time. Then she deleted it and typed something else. I need some space. I am sorry. She sent it before she could revise it again and put the phone face down on the nightstand and got up and went to make coffee and told herself she had done the right thing for reasons that felt increasingly unconvincing the longer she stood at the kitchen counter, waiting for the coffee to brew. Her phone stayed face down. She showered. She reviewed 2 documents she had been putting off. She called Rena and talked about everything except what she had done that morning, and Rena, to her credit, did not push. She ate lunch alone at her kitchen table and watched the garden and tried to feel settled and managed instead to feel like a woman who had thrown something valuable out of a moving car and was now watching it disappear in the rearview mirror. By 4 in the afternoon, she had not heard from him. She told herself that was fine, that it was what she had asked for. Space was space, and a man who respected her would give it without commentary, and she should be grateful that he was apparently that kind of man. By 6, she picked up her phone. His message was there, sent 2 hours after hers. She had not heard the notification because the phone had been face down all day exactly as she had placed it. She opened it. You do not owe me an explanation. Take whatever time you need. I am not going anywhere. That was all. No guilt, no pressure, no performance of patience designed to make her feel obligated to reward it. Just 11 words that sat on her screen with the same quiet steadiness the man himself carried everywhere he went and asked nothing of her in return. She read it 4 times. Then she set the phone down again, but this time face up, and went back to the garden window and stood there while the Dallas evening did its particular thing with the light through the trees, and she had a conversation with herself that was long overdue. She thought about the bathroom in Seoul with the tap running. She thought about 14 months of making herself smaller so a man could feel larger beside her. She thought about a dinner table and 6 men laughing, and 1 man who did not, and the way his jaw had tightened like he was holding something in that the room did not deserve to hear. She thought about 4 hours that felt like 20 minutes. She thought about laughing twice. She picked up the phone on the 5th day. He picked up on the 2nd ring. Neither of them mentioned the gap. He asked how her week had been, in the tone of someone asking a genuine question, rather than making an entry point into something else. She answered honestly. He told her about a deal he had been closing in Houston that had taken an unexpected turn. She asked a question about it that surprised him slightly. She could hear it in the brief pause before he answered. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. At the end he said, "There is a farmer's market Saturday morning I pass every week and never stop at. Come with me." It was such a simple thing, such an ordinary, unglamorous thing. No restaurant reservation, no occasion. Just a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, like 2 people who had nowhere more important to be. "Okay," she said, "just that, okay." She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and felt the wall she had built so carefully over so many years develop a crack so quiet she almost did not hear it. Almost. But here is what is coming. Delbert is about to see something he was not supposed to see. And the way he handles it is either going to be the thing that saves everything or the thing that ends it before it ever fully begins. The secret surfaces, and nothing will be the same after it. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. This story is about to reach its most important moment, and you need to be here for it. The farmer's market was his idea, but she was the one who stayed 2 hours longer than either of them planned. They moved through it slowly, no agenda, no particular destination within it. He stopped at a produce stall and had a genuine conversation with the vendor about soil conditions in a way that told Karen he had grown up around land somewhere and had never lost the connection to it. She filed that detail away without comment. She had been filing details about him for weeks, building a picture of who he was underneath the business and the steadiness, and every detail she collected fit with the one before it in a way that was becoming difficult to dismiss. They bought things neither of them needed. A jar of honey, a bunch of flowers she carried without self-consciousness, 2 coffees from a stand near the exit that were better than they had any right to be. They sat on a bench at the edge of the market and watched the Saturday morning move around them and talked about nothing important in the way that people talk when they are comfortable enough with each other to stop performing conversation and just have one. It was the most ordinary morning she had spent in longer than she could accurately remember. Afterward, he walked her to her car, and she made a decision she had not planned to make. "Come and see something," she said. He looked at her. "Nothing dramatic," she added, "just something I want to show you." He followed her in his own car through 30 minutes of Dallas roads that grew progressively quieter, until she turned onto the long driveway lined with old trees and pulled up in front of the house at the end of it. She got out, and he got out, and he stood beside his car and looked at the property with the particular stillness of a man absorbing something he was not going to rush his reaction to. She watched him look at it. "This is yours," he said, not a question. "Yes," he nodded slowly. His eyes moved across the front of the house, the grounds, the age of the trees, the quality of the silence around the whole property. She could see him putting things together. The badge at the summit, registered under a company name. The way she talked about Dallas, like someone who owned a piece of it. The operations director, the attorney calls, the documents she reviewed on evenings she had mentioned casually, without elaborating. He was a precise man. She had known that from the beginning. Precise men notice things. He turned and looked at her. "How long?" he said. She understood the question exactly. Not how long had she owned the property. How long had she been more than she appeared to be? "Always," she said simply. Something moved across his face that she watched carefully, because it mattered more than she wanted to admit. She was looking for the shift, the recalibration, the moment where the version of her he had been building in his mind got replaced by a new one, shaped around what she was worth, rather than who she was. She had seen that shift before. She knew exactly what it looked like. It did not come. He looked at her for a long moment with the same expression he had been looking at her with since a dinner table in Seoul. Then he said, "Are you going to show me the garden, or are we standing out here the whole time?" Karen blinked. That was all he said. "Are you going to show me the garden?" Like the property and the holdings and the years of carefully constructed privacy she had just casually dismantled in a driveway were simply the house she lived in, and the garden was the part worth seeing. She felt something loosen in her chest so suddenly it almost took her breath. She led him around the side of the house to the back garden, and they walked through it slowly, while the afternoon light did what it always did with the trees, and she told him about the ones she had planted herself, and the ones that had been there when she bought the property, and the corner she had been meaning to do something with for 2 years, but never quite got to. He listened to all of it. At one point he stopped and looked at the old oak at the far end of the garden and said, "That tree is older than both of us combined." And she laughed, genuinely, the way she had laughed twice at dinner, and he looked at her when she laughed with an expression she had to look away from because it was too direct and too uncomplicated, and she did not have the architecture yet to receive it without it undoing her. They sat on the back steps afterward, with the remains of the farmer's market coffee going cold beside them. "You hid yourself," he said eventually. Not an accusation, just an observation offered carefully, the way you offer something to someone you are not sure is ready to hold it. "I was looking for something real," she said. "You cannot find real if you lead with everything you have. People stop seeing you and start seeing what you own." He was quiet for a moment. "Did it work?" he said. "The looking." She considered the question honestly. She looked at the garden and the old oak and the afternoon light laying itself across the grass in long shapes she had stood at her kitchen window, watching alone for 2 years. Then she looked at him. "I think it might be," she said. He did not smile. He just held her gaze with that steady, unhurried quality he carried everywhere, and nodded once like her answer was something he intended to take seriously. She excused herself 5 minutes later, something about getting water, and went inside, and stood at the kitchen sink, and gripped the edge of the counter, and breathed. Her eyes were hot, and she blinked several times and told herself firmly that she was not going to cry in her own kitchen over a man sitting on her back steps, who had just looked at everything she was and asked to see the garden. She cried anyway, quietly, briefly, with her back to the window so he would not see. Then she ran the cold tap, pressed her wrists under it, straightened up, filled 2 glasses of water, and went back outside. He was still there, exactly where she had left him. He asked to see the garden. But Calvin Cho is about to find out everything, the property, the holdings, the woman he called nobody to a man who is now sitting on her back steps in Dallas on a Saturday afternoon like he belongs there. Both pieces of information are going to hit Calvin at the same time, and what he does next is going to be the last thing he ever does in this story. It came to him the way most devastating things come to people who are not paying attention, casually, at a dinner, between courses, A business associate named Park, seated 2 chairs down from him at a restaurant in Seoul, leaned across the table mid-conversation and said, "I heard Calvin Cho's ex is with Delbert Shaw now. The Houston man. Serious money." And then Park went back to his food like he had commented on the weather, and Calvin sat with his fork suspended halfway between his plate and his mouth, and felt something move through him that he did not immediately have a name for. He set the fork down. "Karen," he said. Park looked up. "You know her?" Calvin did not answer that question. He asked a different one. "Delbert Shaw. You know him too?" Park looked mildly impressed. "Good man from what I hear. Built his portfolio from nothing. Houston-based but moves around. Quiet about it though. Not the type that needs a room to know his name." Calvin picked up his glass and took a long, slow drink and said nothing for the remainder of that course. He went home that night and sat in the apartment that still had Karen's absence in it in ways he had stopped noticing until this moment. The specific emptiness of the kitchen at a certain hour. The way the guest bathroom still smelled faintly of something he could not name but recognized immediately when he walked past it. He sat in the living room with his laptop open and typed her name into a search engine for the first time since she left. What came back rearranged everything. Not her name directly, she was too careful for that. But the company name he found attached to a real estate development profile led to another name, and that name led to a portfolio that led to a profile on a private investment network that required credentials he had to call in a favor to access. And when he finally got inside and looked at what was there, he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. She had been worth more than him. Not marginally, not in a way that required careful comparison. Significantly, quietly, and significantly. And without a single announcement, Karen Jasmine had been sitting across from him at his kitchen island eating food she cooked in his apartment, in a dress he had complimented, and she had been worth more than everything he had spent 14 years building. He thought about the dinner. "You smell like a loser." He had said it between bites. He had not even put his fork down. He thought about the way she had sat at that table with her hands folded in her lap, and her back straight and her face arranged into something he had read at the time as wounded pride, and understood now, sitting in his empty apartment at 11:45 on a Tuesday night, was something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with a decision that had already been made long before he opened his mouth that evening. She had already known who she was. She had always known. He had been the one performing for a room full of people whose opinions he needed, because without them, he was not entirely sure what he amounted to. He had been the one who required an audience. He had been the one who needed to make someone smaller to feel the right size. He opened his phone. He drafted the first message at midnight, deleted it, drafted a second one that was longer and more honest, and read it back and deleted that one too. The third version he sat with for 20 minutes before he changed 2 sentences and sat with it for 20 more. The fourth version he sent without reading again, because he knew if he read it once more he would delete it, and he had already deleted enough things in his life that deserved to be said. He did not know if she would read it. He did not know if reading it would change anything. He suspected it would not. He suspected that whatever was happening in Dallas between Karen Jasmine and a man named Delbert Shaw who asked to see gardens and built his portfolio from nothing was not something a message from Seoul was going to interrupt. He suspected that the woman who had sat at his table and absorbed his cruelty without flinching and walked out without a scene and left behind nothing but the faint smell of something in a bathroom he could not name, was not a woman who looked backward. He sent it anyway, because he needed her to know that he knew, not for her sake. He was honest enough with himself at 11:59 on a Tuesday night to admit that it was not for her sake, it was for his, because he was going to have to live with what he had done and what he had lost, and the only thing worse than that was living with it silently, like it had not happened. Like she had been nobody, like 1,000 Karens existed, and this particular one was interchangeable with all the rest. She was not interchangeable. He knew that now in the specific and irreversible way you know things that arrive too late to be useful. In Dallas, the evening was quiet and warm. Karen was on the back patio of her house with a glass of wine she had been nursing for an hour, her legs folded beneath her on the outdoor sofa, the garden doing its particular thing in the fading light. Delbert was beside her, not talking, just present in the easy, unhurried way he was present everywhere, his own glass on the table, his eyes on the old oak at the far end of the garden. They had spent the afternoon doing nothing of consequence. That was the part she had not expected to love as much as she did. Not the dinners or the conversations or the moments that felt significant enough to remember. The nothing. The ordinary, unremarkable nothing of being beside someone who required nothing of her except exactly what she already was. Her phone lit up on the cushion beside her. She glanced at the screen. Calvin Cho. She looked at his name for exactly as long as it took to feel nothing. No anger, no residual ache, no pull toward whatever he had written in whatever message he had spent however long composing. Just the quiet blankness of a chapter that had already ended and whose ending she had made peace with in a bathroom in Seoul, with a tap running, and a decision that cost her everything and gave her everything back. She turned the phone face down on the cushion. Delbert did not look over. He did not ask. He reached for his glass and took a slow drink and said, "That oak is going to outlive every building either of us has ever walked into." Karen looked at the tree. "Probably," she said, and for the first time in the entire story, inside the quiet of her own chest, where no one else had access, Jasmine spoke to herself, in a voice that was not performing for anyone, and not protecting itself from anything, and not measuring the distance between who she was and who she was allowed to be. She said, "I am exactly where I chose to be, not where life had placed her, not where survival had landed her, not where a man's cruelty or another man's kindness had deposited her, where she had chosen." That distinction, she understood now sitting in her garden in Dallas on a warm evening with an old oak tree and a glass of wine and a man who asked to see the garden, was the most expensive thing she had ever earned, and she had earned every single part of it. The light faded slowly over the garden. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. And that is where we leave her. Not standing over Calvin with a trophy. Not delivering a speech. Not proving anything to anyone who was never worth the proof. Just sitting in her own garden, in her own city, beside a man who looked at everything she had hidden for years and asked to see the garden. Jasmine did not get her revenge. She got something Calvin Cho will never be able to buy, manufacture, or understand, no matter how many dinners he sits at or how many women he reduces to footnotes in his own story. She got peace, and Delbert Shaw, the man who did not laugh, got the most extraordinary woman in the room. He just had the patience and the character to wait until she was ready to let him know it. This story is complete, but the conversation is just beginning. Drop in the comments and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the tear in the car, the garden, the kitchen sink, or the moment she turned Calvin's message face down without reading it? And if you watched this entire series and felt every single chapter, share this video right now, because someone in your life needs Jasmine's story today. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on that notification bell. We have more stories coming that will stay with you long after they end. You do not want to miss what is next. We will see you in the next one.
Why Safe Feels Wrong. Free for subscribers. Click the link below for instant access.
She was not supposed to be at the gala. Delbert had mentioned it in passing 3 weeks ago. The kind of event that existed at the edge of his professional life, where names and money moved in circles that required no introduction. She had listened the way she always listened, fully and without interrupting, and she had not planned to attend. She was not a gala woman. She was a back patio, old oak tree, wine at 9 woman, and she had made peace with that distinction. But Simone had flagged the guest list. Second name from the top. Calvin Cho, Seoul keynote speaker, confirmed. Karen had set the list down on her desk and sat with her hands folded and her face arranged into something very still, while something moved through her chest that she was still deciding whether to call fear or simply the specific inconvenience of a chapter that refused to stay finished. She had not told Delbert. That was the part that was going to cost her. Not attending. Not the room. Not even Calvin, who had sent 3 more messages since the first one and received the same silence in response to all of them. It was the not telling. The small, careful decision to carry something alone that she had already promised herself she was done carrying alone. She knew that. She also knew that some habits take longer to break than a season in Dallas and 4 hours over dinner and a man who asks to see the garden. She booked the ticket anyway. The flight to Chicago left Thursday morning. She had until then to decide whether she was walking into that room as the woman Calvin humiliated or the woman who had already decided, in a bathroom in Seoul with a tap running, that she was neither of those things. She was not sure she had made the right choice. She was very sure she was about to find out.